this meeting to order. Adequate notice of this meeting as required by the Open Public Meetings Act of 1975 has been provided by an annual notice sent to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, Highland Park Planet, Desi Talk, no, and posted subsequent to the January 4th, 2024 meeting and posted in the lobby of the Borough Hall of Highland Park. Thank you.
Yay, sorry about that.
All righty.
I didn't put it on the agenda, but it occurred to me with Satna being new, maybe we could just do a quick
let's do some
round of introductions. Stephanie, you haven't seen you in a while.
Yes.
So we'll go around and do introductions. My name is Lucinda Holt. I am the vice chair of this board. Unfortunately, HP could not join us this evening. She had a work commitment that took her to DC.
I'm Diane Ray. I'm the landlord member of this organization, and yeah.
I'm Pauline Devonish. I'm a homeowner in the town.
My name is Stephanie Kim Chohan. I'm your council liaison. So it's good to be back. We haven't met, and then I think when I left out, you guys were just selecting the chairs and vice chairs. So I'm glad that's still going, and we do need one. We do have one open more spot. So anyone at home,
A tenant alternate, yeah.
yeah, a tenant alternate.
So, well, I'm getting ready for this meeting. I was like,
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
No, you've been out, so now you're back on the hook for it. Terry Hover, Borough Administrator and staff to the board.
Hi, I'm Satna Shah, and I am Borough Attorney and the Rent Leveling Board Attorney. Nice to meet all of you.
And I would encourage everybody to speak up a little because that mic's doing all the work.
Okay.
So
Oh.
just to make sure everybody can hear, and we do have some people in the audience. So
Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for being here. The first order of business is the approval of the minutes, which were sent out. These are the minutes from our January 25th, 2024 meeting. If everyone could either review them if you haven't, or if you're prepared to approve them, let me know. I do have one question for you.
Sure.
In the second bullet under hearing of appeals, I think there's maybe a typo.
okay.
Possible. It just says he suggested the board consider setting bad precedent. It sounds like we. Like
Maybe, yes. So I will fix that typo in
there's
second
a-
paragraph.
Yeah, it's just tiny little
Yeah.
thing. It just sounds like the board.
We don't want to create bad precedent. So that's definitely was not the intent. Thank you for catching that.
Just a little tiny thing.
So I will amend that prior to finalizing and sending it to the clerk.
Fantastic. All right. So do I have a motion to approve the minutes with that one correction? Thank you, Pauline.
Second.
Thank you. All right, so all in favor of approving the minutes with the one correction you just mentioned?
Aye.
Fantastic. So the minutes from the last meeting have been approved. The next order of business, we have some discussion. The cone hardship appeal, that was the first time we've been through that process. So at today's meeting, we just like to discuss what lessons were learned. Are there things that we feel like we need to do differently, or what went well? So if we could just address that, some discussion about that would be fantastic and really helpful as we go forward. And hopefully we've learned a lot from that process. I do want to say one thing about that particular process, and this was mentioned at the last meeting. A lot of the challenges that the landlord and the tenants were experiencing were just the result of the fact that the rent ordinance, the rent leveling, why am I not saying words? That went into effect while they were negotiating their increase. And so I think that kind of threw a wrench in the plans that the landlord probably had, and the tenants then were like, wait a minute, there's this new ordinance that just passed. So that's not going to happen again. So that's one thing that was certainly created a problem. So
And I just had one observation. I think the landlords got a little on the defensive because they thought we were coming at them. So I don't know if we can. We have to find a way probably to talk amongst ourselves as opposed to talking when the group is here. And we have to just be careful how we come over. So that was just an observation
Yeah.
I had.
Yeah.
And I'll just throw in, the question was raised to your point, could we have a sidebar? And I shouldn't speak for the attorney, but the attorney at the time was like, no, you
No.
have to do it. So I want to just confirm
Yes.
that we can't
It's a
have private
public process,
discussions
yeah.
about the
Right.
application. So I think your point is right. Think about our tone
Right.
and how it feels to be on both sides. of
Right.
the-
Yes.
Uh,
Because I think they got a little offended at, well, I don't know.
Well,
if
there were some
offended
things
is-
that were said
that were like, you should have done or whatever, and we have to avoid that tone.
So you guys gonna go in executive session or something?
Not for that kind of thing.
Not for that, okay.
Thank you.
But that's a good point. And in redoing the minutes, I was reminded, I did go back to the tape and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of remember
Yeah,
that.
a little
Yeah.
defensive.
Right.
Anything else?
How did they get to us, that case?
That was one where I believe the tenants heard about the ordinance in the works. And this is stretching a memory because it goes back a ways, because you remember they had to wait 12 months before they could come in. So, and I believe because I got calls from both the tenants and the landlord either immediately before or after the ordinance, but it was at the start, kind of like you were saying, Lucinda. And, but my sense was that it might have been that the tenants were the ones who brought the ordinance to the attention. I don't know. I didn't think to ask them, how'd you find out about it? But that I think was, and that was frankly the intent of this ordinance, was to be a tool for tenants to advocate for themselves. So in that regard, I guess it did what it was supposed to do. But I'd have to go back to my email threads to tell you the exact timeline.
Yeah, so this property owner was negotiating the sale, the purchase, right? At the time that the ordinance was going.
I think they had already bought it.
Oh, they already bought it.
Yes,
Okay.
so I think they owned it, but they were figuring it out, or I don't want to swear to that, but I think it was prior, but certainly it's reasonable to think they would have no idea about this brand new ordinance being in place as out-of-town people coming and buying a property as an investment. So I'm sure they were surprised by it.
Have we had other requests? Aside from that group, have we had other?
There have been, it's been difficult to track. I know you had requested it because the calls come in and then they seem to resolve in terms of tenants calling with questions. We give them the information and suggest that they provide the material to their landlord. And most often than not, we don't hear from them again, which I presume means it got resolved, which is the intent again. There have been some other questions. Actually, someone in the audience here tonight has approached me on a matter. He might speak later, so I won't speak for him, about doesn't qualify for a hardship as a landlord, but we're looking at, is the surcharge for capital improvements a possibility? It's a little different scenario, so I don't want to get out ahead of that, but it hasn't been particularly busy in terms of inquiries. A couple questions about where can I find the allowable increase? Those are all the usual questions we get before the new ordinance.
So this was the only actual case or appeal you guys had?
Yes.
Just the first one?
Mhm.
Okay.
And that was a landlord hardship petition.
Okay.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts, comments?
And I just wanted to know that the board did very, very well. Being the first, well, it was the first time I was in such a situation, and with everybody else's help, I thought that we did justice to the problem.
I think we did. Yes, I think.
It took a while to get there.
It
but
took a while to get there,
Yeah,
but
it
I
wasn't an
think,
easy
kind of
situation,
I give it-
complicated situation.
yes, it was
and-
very complicated.
So what happens, like?
Reliving the
I mean,
whole
not
thing.
reliving, but you essentially vote yes, no, are we gonna do it?
No, we had to go through
No.
all their records about the cost to operate the.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, and
And
they
they
had,
had
to-
an
and then they had
attorney.
to, they had an attorney
Oh.
and.
Oh, wow. I
Oh,
missed
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is for the first one.
It's all on tape for your viewing
Yes,
pleasure if
yes,
you wanna
yes,
go watch
I
it.
will,
But
okay.
essentially, the board really had to grapple with the ordinance, which was not particularly specific about how to reconcile, especially make a compromise. Of course, you could just go no,
Yeah.
you could go yes and be
Yeah.
done. But there was a sense that, I'm sorry if I'm putting words, but I did just watch the meeting, in your mouths, but it's, here's what the landlord wanted. Here's what our ordinance
Mhm.
said. And they kind of took it into two parts. Was there agreement that there might be a hardship because of the ordinance intervening in this transaction? And the answer was something, yes, maybe. So then they pursued, well, what would be a fair way, keeping in mind the tenants, and this is protecting the tenants,
Right.
but also trying to accommodate some of the hardship that the landlord was feeling. And so they basically came to a solution, and whether or not the landlord likes it, that was the solution. And the tenants they were very present throughout this process and seemed to be okay with, I'm sure they would rather have not, but, ultimately where it landed.
In the end, no one got everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And everybody got something.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
I think
that's a
that
good way.
was
Uh-huh.
that was the way it was resolved.
Yeah.
I don't know if those tenants are still there. or-
I would assume, I don't know that I would know otherwise
Yeah,
because
that
life
we would
happens,
have
people
no
move on
idea.
for other reasons. But, I did after that meeting, kind of closed out with their attorney and, summarized here was what you have to do and make sure you give the notice. And so those tenants, I think, were armed pretty well with if things were not going the way we had all discussed, I think we would have heard about it.
We would have heard about
So
it.
I'm
Yes,
encouraged.
yes.
I'm hoping everybody's living happily and,
Yes.
moving on. And,
And
as
they-
young, new investment property owners, I think they learned.
And there was also the complication of everything was a level money-wise with the apartments. There was a smaller one, a bigger one. The tenants were saying, he didn't give us this, he didn't give us that. So it was
Some were
a lot of
updated, some were
and
Some
not.
had been
were
renovated,
not.
some weren't.
Some, he wanted to raise some a specific amount, others not. So we had to go through everything.
Oh, through our.
Apartment by apartment.
Yes, yes.
So
it
each
was-
apartment was handled individually.
Yes,
Mhm.
so,
So that was a good lesson that we need to,
Yes.
that's probably a good approach,
yes,
I think.
Yeah,
yes.
I think
it
that
was,
is
yeah.
future reference.
Yeah.
Do we need to update the ordinance?
Probably not for that. That might be more the application to
Yeah.
just try to
Gather that information.
how to gather. And I have learned like what I would ask for again,
Yeah.
given the confusion and some of the documentation materials and stuff like that. And that's actually one of the things that we'll be picking Sapna's brain she comes to us having worked in other towns on their rent control
Oh,
boards.
okay, great.
And so she's already kind of looked through the ordinance at like a high level, just to
Mhm.
see, and some other areas, when we get to that item on the agenda, we have a couple areas where we're gonna not get into the solution tonight, but kind of highlight some areas we may want to tighten up.
So why don't we just move to that unless there are other comments about lessons learned? I think we could move to
You
that
could.
in the agenda. All right. So potential ordinance amendments, and I think, Sapna, you think we have some thoughts about that?
Well, I'm gonna first let Terry lead it and then I'll
Sure.
supplement her because, there are some things that we just on its face, right? That
Yeah.
So Terry, if you want to
Well,
start off.
on my mind, one thing we stumbled into during not related, but somewhat related matter that I can't get into right now. They pointed out to us some language in our ordinance pertaining to enforcement. And I don't have the citation. I can look, maybe you can find that while
Yeah.
I'm talking. But essentially, in a case where we wanted language in the ordinance that said landlords can't put pressure on the tenants to leave if, as because they're frustrated by the constraints of our ordinance. That's my characterization of the language, is much more legal and different than that. But it puts, unfortunately for me,
Yeah.
I have a role in a harassment matter that really, from what
That's not
Sapna
appropriate.
says, is not appropriate.
Yeah.
And that's really more of a
Oh,
criminal
wow.
law enforcement matter.
Um,
And so that's language, and if she can find the section,
Yeah.
she can call it out, that we need to fix, because I was,
Put in a position.
somebody was basically like, well, doesn't the borough administrator, I'm getting harassed, and I'm going, I can't investigate a harassment claim between a landlord and a tenant. That's really a law enforcement matter.
Right.
And it was something that this person quoted at us, and I go, I know it says that, but I can't do that. And I'm gonna have to, I have to refer, if you feel that's happening, you must report it, and there's a process to follow. So that's an area where it's,
Is that on page 6? I'm looking.
well, you better
at-
go by the 321 dash.
Yeah.
Because everybody's got a different.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm looking at 321-6.
And there's another one on 321-20 too. I remember
okay.
because there was two.
Oh,
Yeah,
There's
so,
two sections, correct.
and there's one place in which it says the borough administrator or his or shall have the power in addition to the powers in to file a complaint in municipal court
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and that's.
So
that's
sorry,
a-
this section again?
I'm
can you
sorry,
say that?
that was 321-6-6C. Where
Yeah.
there's just some powers conveyed to me as borough administrator that probably
Okay,
were not
yeah,
okay.
appropriate. So that's Safna was like, and that kind of landed on us because it got quoted to us, and we were going, yikes. And I don't think I appreciated it at the time,
Yeah.
when we were adopting the ordinance. So you'll have to provide us with
Yeah.
some clarifying or more appropriate language. And what was the other spot?
The other spot was, oh my God, I lost my train of thought, because when we were going through that, I was thinking about the other
Ordinance,
section.
I know.
The other section was, we were talking about other requirements for hardship and the application, and then, which you already mentioned before. And then there was,
No, I thought you meant there was two spots with that borough administrator.
oh, yeah,
language.
oh, that one. Yeah, the other one is
There's another
21 to
place.
section 20.
321-20.
Yeah, 20, it's,
Yes, protection from tenant from
Yeah.
retaliation. That's the
Yeah.
section I had in my head.
yeah, that
Um,
was, right.
That basically, again, the borough administrator,
Protection of tenant. from
so here's the
landlord.
good intention is there. You're not
Yes.
allowed to harass. It's no.
Yeah.
The borough or designee does not have the jurisdiction to accept or make
But who's
determination.
enforcing?
Any tenant, so this is inconsistent with the previous
Yes.
statement.
Yes,
So this is more appropriate probably
yes,
to what should happen. But
Yeah.
somehow that squeaked in that earlier section.
yeah.
So we want to fix that.
And then the frequently asked question. we want
Yeah,
to
there
make
was
it
an
more
error, actually, David in the audience
Yeah.
pointed out
Yeah.
a misstatement in a frequently asked question, which is not legally, but it's certainly
It
not,
goes out
it's
publicly.
not helpful to
Yeah.
a landlord trying to do the right thing. So
Sure.
I don't have it in front of me to cite, but the gist of it was that, if there's a question of the rent being appropriate, go ahead and pay the higher amount until we fix it, and that was not the intent, so I have to get that
Okay.
language out of there. There were some other areas, I'll let Diane, I think you said you had some thoughts.
No,
maybe coming in.
what you were just talking about, though, I had this rent increase bulletin, and it did say that landlord cannot raise the rent while the lease exists, but if it's an unconscionable raise, you should pay the old rent until it's resolved.
Yeah.
So.
That might have been the
that's a
intent of
state
what that FAQ language was,
Mhm.
but instead it came off like,
if you're supposed
pay
to
the
pay
bigger
the
amount and we'll
higher.
work it out later, which was never, it's
Right.
not in the ordinance, so it's just wrong.
Yeah.
And it could lead the landlord to a position of getting in trouble because they've now violated the ordinance.
Right.
And we don't want that either.
Right.
So we'll fix that. That I don't need a formal action to do. That was mainly a guidance document.
Yeah.
But we should, and I'll distribute it to everybody, maybe with fresh eyes after having lived with the
Sure.
ordinance, it'd be a good idea to review the FAQ.
And then there was the applications we were talking about, but that,
Yeah,
on a
that's-
high level, yeah.
We get allow a lot of that to happen administratively in the ordinance, and I would suggest we do that, because then every time we want to make a tweak to the
Mhm.
application, we don't have to amend the ordinance to
Yeah.
do that. We can just
Yeah.
establish
Yeah.
the procedure. So one of the applications we want to update the landlord hardship appeal.
Mhm.
But the other thing is we have a provision for capital improvement surcharge
Mhm.
and the ability to make an application, but we don't have an application
Mhm.
form. And so
Mhm.
Satna's gonna help me
Yeah.
propose something to you
Yeah.
guys. You know, we'll make it work in the meantime. If something comes through, we'll follow the ordinance. But we need to have that in hand, so we're not just caught with, you know, it's just, everything was a rush to get rolling with the board. The other area we had talked about previously, and Sapna, I'm not gonna ask you to answer this now, but we questioned, or members of the board questioned, and I don't have a strong feeling about the CPI, use of the CPI and various other data sources to
Yeah.
establish the annual increase.
Yeah.
So if there's a more conventional way to do it, or a more precise way to do it, or a better way, or a different way, whatever you want to put to it, that was something I think the board would really welcome
Mhm.
your advice on, because we know there's more than one way to
Yes.
some towns just go no more than 5%.
Correct.
And that's it, you're
Yeah.
done, see you later. We've always had something that was a little more year to year based on CPI, but there's a lot we don't understand as staff members about CPI. That's not we're not, you know, statisticians. So, and I know that's something HP would want to weigh in on, because I know
Yeah,
she
she
was
has-
bringing that up
yeah.
previously.
Mhm.
But just as we're making a list of things to think about, I would throw that on.
Mhm.
That's the only things I had kind of front of mind anyway.
Yeah, and I have some other kinds that are more of a policy, and I will defer to obviously all of you on what direction you want to take on some other points. I mean, they're not the end of the world if we don't do them,
Mhm.
but as time goes on, if that's something that you guys want to do, because you guys, by the way, have an excellent ordinance as it is, and it's very fair. But there may be some other things, ideas that you may have, what you may consider, for example, and that goes back to the application process on when you're calculating some of these things.
So what other, either for hardship
Yeah.
or capital improvements or what have you, there may be other factors or
Yeah.
considerations. I think, you know, that's something that,
Mhm.
you know, if it's something that's binding us in an uncomfortable way in this, I'd want to know. But
Yeah.
I think if the more flexible, it seemed like having a little flexibility was helpful in coming
Yeah.
up with a compromise. So if we make it too rigid,
Yeah.
that's the only downside, is
Yeah.
that it's easier because now we don't spend 2 meetings talking about it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the flip side is it kind of
Mhm.
means we can't be a little context, you know, sensitive.
Yeah.
But I could see both sides, and certainly any recommendations from this board, or then, you know, Stephanie would bring to her committee to get their opinion on. But, you know, we already talked, live it for a year, and it'll be a year before you know it.
Yeah.
So, and we really started last year. So I just didn't want to lose track of that, and because it takes a while to develop the amendments if we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And then it has to.
And yeah, there's first the work of this group,
Then
and
has to
getting
go through the
happy
whole
with it, and
process.
then the work of
The
Stephanie and the
finance
committee,
group,
and then the
then
council,
council
it's
as a
2
whole.
meetings. So, you know, if it's something we'd want, for example, if there was something really related to that CPI that we don't like, well, we're gonna have to certify the rate by October.
Yeah.
So we need to get moving on that this summer, you know,
Mhm.
to just give you a sense of,
Ready.
and my preference is to kind of not have to do it a million, you know, slice and dice this over and over, but if we have to focus on one and do that and then focus on the next, we can do that too. It's not the end of the world.
Do you have any other
Thoughts
ones,
about
Diane?
amendments to the ordinance or potential
I
amendments?
just have a couple of questions. One is, how does the ordinance dovetail with affordable housing? So if we are encouraging affordable housing, we're also limiting, these units would be under rent control. I mean, does it?
Can you explain that a little
If
more?
we're
New
encouraging-
construction, are you talking
Yeah.
about?
Mhm.
The ordinance
apply.
exempts new construction by state law.
Okay, so new.
So
construction-
any of our redevelopments, when they come to pass, they will not have to follow this ordinance for 30 years.
What about all of the luxury apartments? I guess I'm thinking, and this is me just thinking, that people who are paying $3,500 a month, $4,000 a month for a luxury apartment, do they really need our rent control? I mean,
But then
That's
you're
mostly
talking about
new.
income qualifying, basically, then you're getting into a whole level of program management, because this kind of came up with the last so should we take into consideration the income, their ability to pay? And I think the decision was to back off it, and I guess I'm wondering, are you suggesting, well, if you can
No.
afford 3,500, do you
I
really
I guess
need
I'm
rent
thinking of like
control?
Marywald and
Mhm.
Frederick, and
Mhm.
these are brand new places. There, people are paying a lot of rent. I was always under the impression that rent control was to protect the middle income tenant, the low income, middle income, the tenant who might get exploited, really. And that the rent control was to protect that tenant. I mean, it came about because of Lucinda's bringing her situation to the council's attention, that she had a 50% rent increase. That was, an unconscionable rent increase. We haven't had other situations like that we know of. I just wonder if we're
I mean,
over.
beg to differ, the last application, those were pretty big rent increases and some pretty moderate apartments.
That's true. They were.
Yeah, those were not luxury.
Those are not luxury.
That
no.
But I think more than once it was mentioned that was their business plan. Their business plan was to go in and raise everybody. And they were new landlords. They had.
Yeah, there were, I know
Yeah.
there, I'm not saying it to be like they were bad. I guess I use that as an example of it can happen, and that is what the ordinance is doing. I guess those luxury apartments, they
Yeah,
really
these
are
are-
these new places that
It
this
doesn't
ordinance
apply.
doesn't apply.
It doesn't apply to Marywald. It
No,
doesn't apply
Right,
to.
those
that's
are
what I
always
was
new.
thinking. Yeah.
What?
There's a statute, I think it's in that we quoted in here. We got a little grief about it and we had to explain to people, no, that's not us, that's the state statute, when we were adopting it. I don't know where it is in here, but there's, I guess it was in the 80s or something.
Yeah,
They were-
that's correct.
They were like,
Yeah,
that's
it's
not
like
good.
the day,
Yeah. It was a way to,
I guess they were trying to
Well,
encourage.
thing, they don't get it.
Yeah, but my
People to build
point
houses.
is, if you can afford to pay that amount of money, do you think they would need us?
I guess I think it gets real complicated.
That's
If you start to say only apartments that are valued at X or
Right.
less, this applies to, because then everybody will just jack the rents up.
But what I was thinking is,
How would be the mechanics of that?
what I was thinking is, let me see how I should explain this. I don't think they're gonna come here. That's my thought, like, they are in the group where they can afford to pay that. And if there was something between them and the landlord, I think they would get it worked out. So
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that kind of renter wouldn't really be looking for the rent control board, but I might be wrong, but.
Well, I guess
I'm
putting the
wondering-
specific developments, I'm sorry. Diane.
Go ahead. I'm just wondering if we don't need a mission statement. Like, what is our mission? What are we? What is
Oh,
our
okay,
goal?
I see.
Is your guiding
Yeah,
light
this is-
and
and this
shining
is-
star.
Yeah, this is entire statute just on rent control.
So the provisions of this ordinance are here. If you're suggesting that there needs to be like the whereases, I wonder if when we adopted it, they were there and they're just not here in your version. So I could certainly pull that out. Whereas it's important to keep us affordable to all members. There might have been language like that in the, introductory language. I don't know. I got to go back. It's been a while.
Well, maybe that's what's missing.
Maybe
That's what you're.
I I guess one area, and it came up in a conversation I had with Sapna, that something you said, Pauline, I'm curious, you know, I pondered like, well, what would happen if someone negotiated, like somebody had a really low rent and they knew it and they wanted to be nice to the landlord. I don't know why you would, but let's say
Right.
that could happen. Technically, you'd be violating our ordinance as a landlord if you pass along that rent increase.
Right.
And the concern, and so part of me was thinking, well, maybe that, well, if you got a deal, they made a deal and it's, you know, but then how do you know that it's not pressure? It was a
Yeah.
pressure you know, how do you know that they really consented to that increase of their, you know, I don't, you
Right.
understand what I'm saying? So
Right.
you hit on that, it made me think of that question I had for Sapna recently. And I go, oh, I don't know, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And we even said who would want to pay more if they don't have to. But I guess I want to go back to your point, Diane, or try to understand it a little better, because, you know, I think the idea is that just nobody should have their cost of living go up too fast, regardless of what they're paying. And so this establishes a baseline and it makes it, you know, you can decontrol upon, and then they can readjust to the market at that point. It doesn't apply to what right now are more luxury properties because the way the statutes work, they don't. But, you know, and eventually they won't be in 25 years, they won't be our fanciest places, or maybe they will be, I don't know. But I'm just trying, I want to make sure I understand I kind of understand it because, you know, but even if I could afford to pay $3,000, $3,500 a month, I don't know that it's fair that my rent could go up 10% without any protection for nothing changing, you know.
What I think is a larger issue is people not being aware of the ordinance.
Mhm.
I see that being a larger issue where I hear about people moving out and they just didn't know. that they-
Absolutely.
That's
And we
what I
have
think is
no
the
way of
biggest issue.
tracking it. We
I know
don't
it's happened in my
We don't even
building,
know
for
who's
sure.
under rent control.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't, everybody's under rent control until it's been decontrol.
Correct.
And decontrol happens upon vacancy.
Right.
So this was on purpose. We don't want to be in the managing of units business with 50% of our town being rental. So
It's a lot to
and
lot
it
to
never,
manage.
you can never be accurate. I mean, I know it. I worked in New Brunswick next to the rent control lady 25 years ago.
Yeah.
She's just doing her best, you know. I think to your point, and one thing I know HP wanted to talk about, so I didn't put it on the agenda, but we could certainly talk about it, is just awareness raising, both with landlords and with tenants. There's certainly more we can do.
Yeah.
And to talk about and get ideas for what we could do better as a board or even as for staff, you know, to make sure that's very apparent.
Will Hirsch want that one?
That's what I was talking
Mhm,
about,
mhm.
that email. But he and HP had been having a side conversation and he had asked if they could talk about it here, but she's not here. So I didn't want to
Yeah.
put it on, not exactly knowing what that was.
Well, maybe we can have that on the agenda for the next.
Sure.
meeting if she's here. It
Um,
would be great to.
But
because
I
think it's a
feel
real-
pretty
I
strongly
know
we
it's a
don't want to
problem.
get into like,
Yeah.
because we don't even know all of our rentals, Diane, you know that,
I
because
know,
not
I
everybody
know.
registers
And
and we
that-
don't have the capacity.
It's sort of a
door knock.
voluntary program. Rent control at this point is, it's kind of, the landlord lets us know.
The good news is the large complexes
Yes,
are, of which we have many.
yes.
It's the smaller landlords. They, I believe, are following it because they have too much at stake to not.
Absolutely.
And so it's really, I think, and it's for the smaller landlords that are just doing it because they just happen to own a property or two that don't pay attention to the regulatory day-to-days of a municipality, that we have to make sure they know. Because most of them want to do the rules. They're not looking to not.
Yeah.
And certainly as we're discovering rentals we weren't aware of, we're making them aware of the ordinance if they didn't already, and making sure they get their COs and register their properties with us. So we do that on an ongoing basis. But once we have them, we know they're there. Until it sells and maybe somebody moves in, you know, that's owner occupied. So it's a lot of units, as you, I don't have to tell you, to keep track of. And I think it's a fool's errand to think we could keep track, especially when we have vacancy decontrol.
Yeah.
The value of doing so I think is less, because if you had a more complicated scheme where upon vacancy, now you can raise it 5%, well, then you really need to know
You
what
would
it
have to
was.
track
Then you
yeah.
need to know what the new rents were, show me the lease, all that stuff, which I don't.
We don't have the
think-
capacity.
We don't have the capacity, and I don't think that was the intent of the
No.
council at the time. You know, we really wanted, but I would like to be able to figure out how to help landlords do the right thing and by our ordinance, regardless if you like it or not, and how to help tenants know about it,
Just so they
because
know.
they'll help the landlords do the right thing too, you know, because a lot of the
People know.
ones, they
Yeah.
didn't know, or they were trying to get over.
Yeah.
Okay, oops, I didn't know, now I
Yeah.
know. So.
So shall we move on to the next order of business, pending applications?
There are none. I just wanted to, keeping that as a kind of a
Standing.
standing thing.
Mm.
We may have a capital improvement surcharge. I don't know, but we'll just have to see how, if that emerges in the next few weeks or not. And then Sop and I will work together on pulling the materials together and, you know, we'll get them to you in advance, and, you know, tenants will have to be notified and all the usual, you know, requirements. So, yeah, I just wanted
Got
to, I kind of had it from the last one. I was like, let me just leave it on there.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Okay, thank you. All right. So I think we can open up the public comment period unless there's anything else we need to address. Yeah. Okay. So,
Do you want to speak, members of the,
My
you,
name is-
you have to come to the mic so we can get you on the recording.
Okay, oh, I see, okay. So I can.
Stand right here, because this
Oh,
microphone will pick you
microphone.
up. I have it there just because that's the way I have the camera.
My name is Hai Kong Lu. I rent the 101 South 2nd Avenue. I live in Piscataway. I'm a small landlord, okay. I own property in Highland Park, 2 of them, and 7 in Piscataway, 2 in New Brunswick. I don't have overhead. Basically, I don't have mortgage, and I learned from the YouTube how to fix things. For example, the other day I go to my tenant, the oven did not work. So I changed the igniter. I find out the model number, and go to find on the internet what is the model number for the igniter. $40. Without doing this, I could pay $600 for a new. So I don't have overhead. So what happened? I believe many landlords, some are like me, very little overhead. So he can afford to reduce rent by $200 to get a good tenant, right? So I put the rental edge on 0. Normally for my apartment, 3 bedroom, 1.5 beds in Highland Park, in the South 2nd Avenue, close to the Rogers campus, convenience. You know, you can see what other property with 1,150 square feet. You can see other 0 rental edge, and you try to reduce $200. Then you get a lot of attention, and you rent out in 1 week. Really, 1 week, my rental is gone. I don't mind. I have no overhead. So I don't mind lose to lower 200. But after a few years, you see, this is my market rental apartment. Now my rental is $200 below that. After a few years, it became $500. I was not careful, so I think that makes me a fool. I mean, I can be a kind guy, but $500 doesn't make me a fool. I try to move up 300, hold that bump into rental control. You see, for example, right now, I rent a very well-to-do tenant. I rent a $1,950 per month, $1,950 for a 3 bedroom, 1.5 beds, 1,150 square feet. And I hired Century 21 JJ Lover to give me market analysis, because I told Her name is Lauren Levy, very high ranking. Probably you don't know JJ Lawful. JJ Lawful should know Highland Park because that's their basis here. And Lauren Levy is very high ranking. That's why I suppose it's credible. So, but I told Lauren Levy, maybe I should spell Lauren Levy, that is going to give to the Highland Park officers. So he's very careful. She's very careful giving me market analysis, and it shows the rental should be between 2,300 and 2,500. Now I rent to my tenant in 1950, and the analysis, let's simply put the average $2,400. I mean, that's a huge difference, right? Almost $500. So I want to raise the rent to 2,200 because I still want to give $200 below the market rent. That's where I can get a better tenant, and they won't try to leave and renew the lease. You know, this is big hassle, try to get a new tenant and stuff. And so I submitted my, then was rejected. I come here to present my case because I think my case is not unique. There are some landlords who pay off everything, very little overhead. So give $200 below the market rent. And suddenly, after the pandemic, other people jumped so high, and he found out he had huge difference. And he come up want to increase. It doesn't work because currently the current framework of the ordinance allow appeals only two ways. Either you have hardship. You know, the tenant like this don't have hardship. Otherwise, he won't lose $200 for it. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's impossible for a tenant like me who is reducing $200 from the market and still have the hardship. You won't do that, of course. There's no case. And another is capital improvement. But what if this landlord do not have the future capital improvement? They can't. No way. No appeal. So I come here present a solution you will think about. It's a third appeal. I give a very simple name. We have appeal method number one is landlord hardship appeal. We have appeal method two, future capital improvement landlord appeal. Now I think about the third three. However, I think about how to make it workable. We don't want the 10,000 landlord come out with this thing. It become unworkable. I have some idea. We can call, I simply call it landlord fair rent to non-hardship tenants appeal. Landlord fair rent to non-hardship tenants appeal. Basically, landlord bear the burden to prove what is the fair rent. That's a tricky question. Many realtors can come up with high numbers. It has to be a very good reputation. Realtor, very good reputation. Recognized, very honest the realtor. What is the fair rent? Second, what is non-hardship tenant? That's another tricky question. Do you think my tenant, I can describe her. Do you think she's a non-hardship tenant? She earns only a few $100. She attends Harvard psychology department. She sometimes, that's part of her PhD program. She takes some patients, you know, talk to the patients, some suicidal patients. She earns a few $100 per month. So you think, okay, that's very hardship, but in reality, she rented my apartment alone, $1950. She rented her previous apartment, $3,000 in New Brunswick, high-rise modern building, $3,000 alone. And she has $200,000 in the bank because she sent me rental application. I have this. Is she a hardship tenant? She earns so little. But her family so rich, she can afford $3,000 in renting an Asper, Highland Park. So in my case, she is not a. So that's why I say hardship. Is a hardship tenant? It's difficult. That's another difficult. What is the fair rent is difficult. What is hardship is difficult. If you put the ordinance to allow this landlord fair rent to non-hardship tenants out, 1,000 people will come to appeal. The landlord will come. This place will overcrowded with landlord. You have to put a limit. Only number 3. Only will be a very serious difference between the after rent control and the market value. The landlord is allowed to appeal. For example, in my case, my current rent is $19.50. After the rental control applies 3.8%, it's $2,024. But the market value could be $2,500. Only if after the rental control, the amount is significant, less than the previous number 1 established market rent, the landlord is allowed to appeal. Only if you apply the third condition, you can cut down. Maybe only a few people, otherwise you have a huge number of people. I want to read the text. My tenant tell me some crocodile tears. Then after very heavy appreciation, then he said, it is a steal of rental. Let me see, wonderful, right? Actually, I'm not too much concerned with how I win the case. I do not have overhead. Even I do not get my case, that's fine. But make people make a good ordinance to, let me see. Oh, yeah. So say, thank you so much for the update regarding the lease. I'm sorry to hear that they did not approve your increase. Believe me, she's not sorry. That's called crocodile tears. And I have said previously, I greatly appreciate your generosity and the lease that we have agreed upon. I'm aware that this is a steal. This is honest. He said, this is a steal of an apartment. That's the honest thing I heard. It is a steal. A 2,500 market apartment, she got at 2024. And then he said, I'm so appreciative that I got to reside in it. Okay, so you get an idea. A very serious injustice is done. I was mocked. Oh, okay. So that's why I come, we think about the solution. But however, to make the solution workable, we don't want 1,000 landlords to come out to fight.
Thank you.
It's just that.
Oh.
So David, what is your, is it a 2-family, a 4-family, a 6-family?
101 South 2nd Avenue is a two-family house.
Okay,
There's apartment 1 and apartment 2.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, both are 3-bedroom, 1.5 beds, 1,150 square feet. Now I rented her for 1950. That's almost one bedroom. But
I also want to agree that Laura Levitt is
What?
a great professional. Ms. Levitt is a.
Oh, really? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Free
I saw-
marketing tonight.
So that's what I said. If you get the market, evaluation, you need to find reliable. Many people, many realtor is willing, especially you unheard of them, give you either very high or
It's like property valuation.
yeah.
He brings up an interesting
Yeah.
point, though.
Yeah. Thank
Okay,
you,
but
David.
basically,
Thank
that's
you so much.
okay.
Thank you. They're gonna talk now.
Okay, so I can leave now.
Yes.
If you're
Okay.
done, you can leave.
Okay, I'm done. Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Good to
thank
meet
you.
you in
Have a
person.
great night.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. So what were you gonna say, Diane?
Well, in your experience, are 1 and 2 families usually included in rent control?
It depends on the, yes, but it depends on the ordinance of the town. So the thing is that there's some places that it's 4 and over. Right, and Highland Park doesn't have that. It's basically.
Everyone, we
Yeah.
changed that.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
right, because when I remember Matt
Mhm.
Hale saying, no one else is doing this, we're gonna lead the way and include 1 and 2 families.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, I hear what he's saying.
Well, why is it special that it's a 1 or a 2 as opposed to a 5 or a 7 unit that might have had the exact same scenario?
Mhm.
I'm just curious. I'm not,
Because well, do you still have your single family?
yes,
And, you know, it's.
but I do like he does. I kind of keep it low because I don't like my tenant and she's probably watching now. You know, now I'm like, well, I better start incrementally doing it a little more, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's doing the opposite. It's causing people to go with the increases where in the past, maybe it would be $25 or $50, but now you're gonna go with that 3 point or whatever
A lot of landlords, and this is totally anecdotal, but I would say by a lot, which is based on how many calls I get here, 3. But there are small landlords like you and me, you know, that call every year for that number, and that's what they use because they just want to like blame the borough. You know, I'm just following the borough's number, and that's what I'm using. There are plenty that don't move them at all. There's some that go 2%. You know, there's all over the map. So you're right. It may be, and I've not been following ours. Just full disclosure, I've been just doing more like a 2% because that's what I feel comfortable doing.
But in speaking to that point, since COVID, everything has gone haywire. So I don't know if the borough, the rent control board 3.5 has as great an impact as with the country and everything going wild. So I won't, in my thoughts, I'm not thinking, some people will be doing it, but I don't think it's across the board. Because if I had a tenant I don't have a tenant, I have a single family house. But if I had a tenant for a while and we had a relationship, and I saw this document saying you're raising 3.5, I would still be conscionable to know the increment that I'm gonna give them or whatever. I won't just jump to
You do what you think is
I do what I
fair.
think is fair. So I think there's still a lot of that out there, as opposed to looking at the ordinance and saying, oh, I'm gonna raise you 3.5.
I don't know if you remember this, Stephanie, but my recollection from the discussions around the ordinance from council, which may have shifted, people come and go, there's new members on the council, that the reason we included the 1s and the 2s and the, more than what was in the prior ordinance was because we know there are so many in town and that there were some complaints about higher rents in those, but they were anecdotal. It wasn't like I have like statistics to prove it, but that was the vibe I got from the council. Cause I think one of the earlier drafts just followed what we did before. So there was an actual mindful decision to include
It was
all.
4 or more or something was in there.
Yeah.
That was
Usually
what
it's
it
3
originally.
Because
Was-
that's what's the state housing code.
I can't remember.
includes.
I trust you. I don't remember exactly. It was 3+ or was it 4 up, and so, yeah. And it is all, I know from the research I did back in the day, it just varies town to town, what's included and what isn't.
It's part of the policy, right? Town, it's policy.
So I think
What they wanna do.
the tenant, concerns around the tenant certainly were forefront in the thinking about this ordinance and protecting as many of them as possible from large increases.
And it was around the revow time. We didn't know how the revow, what was gonna happen and
What impact that's.
yeah. So
And
all of that you would have to
yeah,
go to.
we don't know how many 1 and 2 family rentals we have. I guess I'm just not real comfortable that we're enforcing something and we don't have like solid
Data. But it's hard to get
Well, you, I
data
mean,
when we don't have the capacity to have
Yeah.
someone go out and.
yeah, and
Market
they can have like a
analysis.
business registration, like in some towns, they have a registration every year, they have an annual, you have to check in how many units you have, what are their rents
We
are, there's a
have that.
rent
We
roll.
do that, but only for the ones we know about.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the problem, and it's not a problem, I don't, shouldn't
Yeah.
characterize that.
Yeah.
There's a dynamic in our town, a lot of, like, I know that I can count on my hand the number of people I know who are faculty, who go away on a, a thing for 2 years, and they rent their house out for a couple years, and then they come back, and so we have there's not, everybody is a career landlord in this town. There's a lot of people who own a
Yeah.
property, and it was their parents' property.
Mhm.
And I know 3 people in that category. Instead of selling it as an estate, they rent it
Right.
out. So there's a lot of, the dynamic is different here, I think, that because we have such a strong rental market, people do hold on to them with no
Yeah.
mortgage, because they're,
Mhm.
and it's, revenue.
Mhm.
But are they maximizing the revenue? Maybe not, as he's obviously indicated.
Yeah.
And.
But you can't wake up one morning and say,
No,
let me
yeah,
charge
this-
market rate
Yeah.
because you haven't been for the last.
That's
years.
yeah. So, and I don't know what precipitated
Yeah.
this situation, why all of a
Mhm.
sudden it was like,
Yeah.
what am I, an idiot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and if I can also say this too, and I don't know what the discussions were before, but what I've seen, and this is kind of unfortunate, and I've seen this also with the larger units, is when you have the rent control, sometimes the landlords either don't make the applications, either hardship or capital improvement, and they're not improving the premises.
Yeah.
So then you have that issue because they're saying, well, why would I do that? I'm only getting
You
this
raised
much.
that before,
Yeah.
Diane, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
that is something that I've seen, and it's awful.
Yeah.
And so the question is then, who gets hurt? The tenant, right?
Yes.
Because I remember this, especially like the elevator buildings where there's a lot of maintenance with the elevators, and somebody may throw a liquid, or and everything needs to get maintained, and then you have unfortunately people who may have disabilities and they can't. So I mean, it's and that's tough. That's when it gets really tough.
We had a situation recently that actually I talked to Matt Hirsch about because he knows this person. And it was someone who was subleasing a condo. And then the owner of the condo decided to sell the condo and gave him like 0 notice and said, you have to get out. Meanwhile, the guy's like ill and in
What a
treatment
nightmare.
and bordering on, I mean, I don't think he's homeless. I don't know what happened to him, but when I said to Matt, is this rent control? Is he under any protection at all?
He has a lease, I would think.
He didn't have a lease. He was
Oh.
subletting.
How do you sublet with?
I don't know. I mean,
They
that's
just
what.
had
Oh,
an
he
agreement.
subletted from
They
somebody
did.
who was a
Tenant.
renter,
Yeah.
maybe.
They didn't have.
So he.
So
yeah.
I guess if you don't have a lease, is that the
Yeah.
I
dividing
kinda
line?
think, I mean, I
That's
don't
a-
know.
That's
And
a
you
yeah.
can't-
Unless
don't
in
have
the
course.
lease, there's a
Don't have
subletting,
I
they
think
allow
it's
for
allowed.
it.
And my lease that I use says you can't sublet without my permission.
Right.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah.
that was, let's run that scenario, was my place, they subletted without my permission, I think I'd be free and clear. I'd be like, this person's here without my
Correct.
even permission
That's
to
correct.
be here. They did this as it's almost like a side biz. an
Exactly
Airbnb
right.
or
Like
something.
they correct an Airbnb, and
Yeah.
like they really should go after the tenant then. But the tenant, whoever sublet it. wanna get
What is the
involved.
recourse? And they need a house. They don't need to be.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is someone who really needed protection and just falls through the cracks.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I mean. it's not
sometimes you
that-
have to you have to protect yourself in those kind
Correct.
of engagements. And
Correct.
unfortunately, it sounds like maybe somebody represented they had more,
Correct,
there was going to be a longer term
that's correct.
arrangement. And certainly the zero notice
Kids.
is bad,
Yeah.
but presumably if there was a main tenant, they would have gotten the notice and they
That's
should have
right.
conveyed it
That's correct.
to the sublet.
That's correct.
It sounds like this might have been more of an under the table
Correct.
arrangement.
With, you know, under the table.
Under the
cash.
table, not illegal, but.
Yeah,
not-
yeah,
Not,
yeah, like a handshake.
yeah.
you know,
Sounds
conversation.
like-
And we're missing some facts, you know, because the thing is that this person's going in and out and we're talking about a 1 or 2 bedroom. I'm sure the landlord knew that this person was there also.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
Right, that's a fair
And
point.
what, somebody said Airbnb, you know, there are a lot of Airbnbs.
No,
in
not
High-
many. When I go online, I don't see them.
Oh, I've seen,
I say like, if I saw 5 listings on Airbnb,
really?
yeah.
Oh,
I think it goes like this. I was wondering if there's a way to get the data to see if it correlates with, they don't give data easily. You have to have ordinances in place.
But that's not covered under anything.
No, and
No.
that's one of those things that comes up in the conversation, some resident or somebody, and we don't have a policy pro con, it's just, it is. I think certainly landlords could preclude that in their leases, which is something to think about personally, not that I'm worried about it. But we've kind of, because the number was relatively low, it didn't seem, like, talk about things we have tough time enforcing. That would even be tougher to get that. Now, there's ordinances you can put in place, as I understand it, that Airbnb then has to
Yes.
comply with. But then
Yes.
it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So
And there's a
if we really
percentage.
thought there was, I've asked Scott over the years, and it's like, yeah, there's a handful of them out there.
Yeah.
But we haven't gotten a
You
lot
asked
of.
Scott and he told you there were a handful of them, or did you say you?
Scott, I mean, because he brought it up to me once, like, do we want to go down? Because somebody raised it to him and we don't have, and I've said, I'm not taking it on unless you tell me you think we have a
But
code
Terry,
enforcement
that's
problem.
another board, because that won't come.
That
out,
wouldn't even
right?
be, I think, a board. That would just be an ordinance
An
that sets
ordinance
forth the
or
rules.
whatever, yeah.
Either you're allowed to have them, you're not allowed to have them. If you're allowed to have them,
Yeah.
here's the rules.
There's the.
Yeah.
You
rules.
know, you have to get a CO
Yeah.
and, you know, can't, you know, that kind of stuff.
And there's like a
Um,
percentage, everything that's in the ordinance too.
Oh, that's a whole
Yeah,
new-
it just seemed like a lot of work for,
That's what I was.
when
just-
my casual searches for Airbnbs
Yeah.
for Highland Park,
Yeah.
right, the last time I looked a month ago, it was like 3 dots on the map.
Did we have anyone else waiting?
Oh, gosh, Lucinda, I forgot. I didn't know before. There are no attendees.
Okay, I just wanted to make
Thank you for
sure.
asking. I almost, I did not, I usually,
Yeah.
I kind of looked while our last speaker was there and I didn't see anybody in waiting, so I wasn't too worried.
Okay.
So
So he was basically, what he was asking for, another option to be added.
something that would somehow, yeah,
Or changing some
or a
language.
third type of
apply.
hardship
Yeah.
that would,
there-
you would only be granted
hardship.
if you met certain, as a landlord, like your
And
rents
your
were below
tenant-
market by a certain amount
Yeah,
and the tenant could pay it.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then we'd be in the certification of incomes
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
around here, which
And
I would rather not be in.
but
but-
what about if they didn't raise rent a certain amount in a certain amount of last year?
Well, that kind of came up in the
In
last
code,
one,
yes, yes.
because
right.
one of the tenants, for whatever reason, with the prior owner, had, maybe because it was a personal relationship
Yeah.
and felt
It
like
sounds
she
like
was
they
a
had a
single
personal
person and she liked her or whatever,
Yeah.
she got very modest increases prior to them
Mhm.
owning the property.
Mhm.
But then the balance is going from that to what can, even if it's well below market, how much is it fair to, what is a fair increase in
It's
that
it's supposed to
situation?
be from the last, like it's supposed to.
So
be from,
we
like,
came up
last-
with a compromise,
Okay.
but.
Because it would have been like a 46 or 49% increase.
Yeah.
It was a huge, to get to kind of where they wanted to go.
Yeah.
So, but that was exactly that scenario where, for whatever reason, that unit, she'd been there the longest,
And
and,
they had-
and obviously it was just a nice, easy tenant, liked her, whatever the reasons, I mean, you can have whatever reasons you want. Which wasn't really the new people's problem, but it was in the sense that that was the agreed upon rent, but like, I've been there, I mean, it
Oh, yeah.
happens, you know, where either life gets in the way and you don't increase it for a while, or then all of a sudden, you know, better get to this, but it's not, you gotta balance what's
Yeah, we can't.
fair market wise with what's
Yeah.
fair human wise,
But if they.
And a good
rent-
landlord does
yeah.
that, because they don't want to lose a good tenant.
But even if they were renting, long-term renters, we're talking about 10+ years, their rents are way lower
Mhm.
than
Mhm.
what's
Mhm.
listed.
Definitely.
So,
Yes, definitely.
Absolutely, because, but a lot of that you can't blame the rent control for, because the
mhm,
rent control just came in, but it comes from years of just kind of
yeah.
easygoing,
Mhm.
probably good relationships.
And in the past few years, rents have, gone
Yes.
up.
So I think you're right, and I think landlords may be waking up a little
Yeah.
too. The other thing is anecdotal, but based on the tax office, what goes on, I feel like a lot of people have no mortgage on their properties in town for whatever reasons. And so
Mhm.
the other reason that it might not become as much of a pressing issue is if your overhead is a little bit lower because you're not paying that
Right,
mortgage.
yeah.
You are subsidizing if you want to look at it that way with because you don't have that. But that's the other reason I think maybe sometimes it's a set it and forget it kind of thing with if you have a long-term tenant and you don't have a mortgage. But then if taxes go up more than you expect and
And all of a
other
sudden-
things, water bills go up, things go up,
Mhm.
and then you need to reevaluate. Or your circumstances change and you need to take a loan out and, now you've got money you need to pay back. as you did
Right.
Before. It's
Any
tough.
other business? Okay. Would someone like to, do I have a motion to
Motion
adjourn?
to adjourn?
Do I have one?
Second. You've only got two other.
I was like, is someone gonna make a motion?
Yeah.